And what I
Yeah.
think I found is you can really start doing small, low intensity impact. And if someone responds well to that, you can kind of stair step them up. And then
Hmm.
using strategic resistance training to get additional mechanical loading, but then you're also kind of what I call bulletproofing their bodies for impact.
You know how the internet goes through seasons of what's popular. Like we've gone through weighted vests, we've looked at protein, we've looked at fiber most recently. Right now, what I see in my feed a lot of is people paying attention to bone and bone mineral density. So I think this is brilliant because it is so important to know your numbers, to know where you're at, and to also make sure that you are working to stave off the loss of bone mineral density because that happens as we age. Dr. Nick Trubee is my guest today, and he is an exercise physiologist and certified strength and conditioning specialist with over 17 years in the industry. He's a former university professor and he specializes in bone density optimization, resistance training and impact, and long term structural resilience. Isn't that what we all want? Long-term structural resilience. I know I'm definitely jonesing for that. And I am dialing in all of the things, my resistance training, my impact exercises, my nutrition in order to optimize that. Nick has worked with a wide variety of people, from first responders to athletes to adults, rebuilding strength to prevent and combat osteopenia and osteoporosis. And today we're talking all about your bone health. So I'm excited to talk with him about this. Let's welcome Dr. Nick Trubee to the podcast. So we often hear that osteopenia, osteoporosis, bone density is being, talked about in social media right now. I hear it, it's all over my feed, which makes me happy because I think it's something that we definitely need to pay attention to. You're in this field, of course, and so you must be thrilled that this is all coming up and having its season right now. Tell us, have you seen firsthand what happens when someone ignores their bone health for too long?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because I've kind of worked with a broad range and spectrum of people. And, I think it's going to surprise a lot of people hearing this, and that I've worked with, pretty elite level high school women that are
Mhm.
starting to see low bone density, and there's a whole gamut of things that could be an issue that's causing that. But even more so, it's I think we start to notice once we start 40, 50 years old, things that used to be easy or came natural to us in terms of our strength or capacity or endurance, whatever, that we may not have been focusing on, all of a sudden start to have an impact the other direction, and things become more challenging, more difficult. And I think that's starting to the awareness of that, I think, has been turned on a little bit.
Mhm.
And the beauty I've seen recently is that the target as far as our training has shifted much more to metabolic health as far as increasing muscle mass and strength and all the things that influence our ability to age much more gracefully and still be able to be adventurous and do all the things we want to do. Um, but to go back to that original question is it's nice to finally be able to put things out there where it's being much more receptive. I think that's the most fun part is people are interested in it now too.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that people with PhDs are really being highlighted more on social media. That's exciting because it's like you're bringing the science and it helps just maybe the influencer to understand, or those who are just following influencers to recognize that this goes a little bit deeper and there's some really great science and data and studies behind it. And the thing is, we don't see bone, right? So we don't know that it is maybe losing its density until it's too late, until we suffer a fracture or a break. But we see muscle, so we focus on muscle, which is great because inadvertently we're focusing on bone there. But
Sure.
I'm guessing you're seeing a lot more people in 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond start to focus on this. And what trends are you seeing?
Yeah, realistically, most of it's probably 95% women that I'm fortunate to work with. There are some men out there that are focused on bone health and things along those lines. But most of the women that I work with are really undersized and kind
Mm.
of smaller. And many of them are very fit with a great history and background of exercise and being active. But when you dive into the details as far as how they're using their bodies, most of that activity doesn't involve much impact. right? Not a whole lot of jumping or landing or those
Mhm.
athletic movements that require that level of capacity. Or if they are resistance training, not really challenging themselves to the osteogenic level that we're hoping to see to hopefully influence the bone in the right direction. And I
Yeah,
think along with that, there are some dietary things that can be addressed, obviously, just as far as overall calories or protein or whatever direction you want to go. But I think that really surprises a lot of people is because they're really, most are pretty fit in general. And then they're
Mhm.
getting this diagnosis and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not allowed to do anything anymore. That's kind of the first conversation that they get in, and then all the wheels kind of fall off if they're not really motivated to find their own answers.
Sure. You said something about history of activity. And what types of activity? A lot of people who are listening will have children, grandchildren, probably more grandchildren, who are now starting the sports world, and a lot of people. I mean, I trained a lot of people that were older, over 50, 60, 70, and so many of them didn't do anything back in the day. They didn't do group sports, they didn't do anything like that. So maybe they're walking right now and they're, getting their walk on and doing a little bit of lifting and they think they're doing enough, just like you said. But when we look at the scans, it's like, oh, you haven't been. And maybe growing up, you didn't do any of those things. So if we look at a history of activity, what sorts of activities are really beneficial in our younger years?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, resistance training is always the kind of the paramount for me because if we can really build to the best of our abilities in the muscle mass, right? That's such a huge quality just for longevity and metabolism and bone health in general, just from kind of a protein synthesis standpoint. That's always number one on my list. If we can get fit there, understand how to move our bodies, understand how to use our bodies mechanically correctly, that can go a long way. Outside of that, if you do have a history, and this is kind of a double-edged sword because I do have those that have had a history of being very competitive with things in like gymnastics
Hmm.
or kind of bounding, jumping sports. But body weight is always a premium in those sports. So many times under-fueled, over-exercise was a pretty
Sure.
common state for them.
Yeah.
So likely never really reached peak bone mass. Not that we have a
Mhm.
measure for that because we're not testing until they're in their sixth decade of life. But most, I don't think, really did ever reach it just because of that kind of dichotomy of always exercising and not really feeding enough for the sport. But resistance training and any kind of jumping, landing, bounding, jump roping, those types of things can go a long way as far as continually showing the stimulus for the bone needs to be able to have this capacity, right? It needs to see it. And it's not just one time. It's like I need to be able to consistently see it over years, decades, to really maintain that quality is important.
I always pride myself at being a gymnast, but like when I was growing up, I did that for years and years competitively. So when I look at my DEXA scan now, it's good. I'm a plus, above my T score and Z score are above zero, like well above, like into the 90th percentile. So I'm happy about that.
Amazing. Yeah.
But also, genes have a lot to do with it, right? Our genetics play a part. Can you talk to us about what predisposition someone with maybe poor genetic factors could happen?
Sure, yeah, that can definitely be, part of the equation. I've also seen where maybe there was a point in time where a person was on a high dose kind of steroid
Right.
situation that has really deloaded a lot of bone or some kind of medication or some kind of gut issue where absorption was really low. So a lot of it can kind of be traced back to that early years as far as, how was the nutrition, how was the absorption, how was stress. But there is some genetic component as well. But I think a lot of that can be combated with how we're approaching just the overall wellness in general and keeping that priority of the movements and the time and the energy we're using, really dialing that into is it going towards the goal, which kind of sounds silly. Is it actually going towards the goal of challenging our bones, right? Not every movement that we do, it might be difficult and challenging. It may not exactly be what the bone is looking for.
I'm going to get to that. What is the bone looking for in just a second? So you said if we didn't have maybe a really great history of activity, maybe we didn't do much, maybe we were on certain medications that caused a loss of bone mineral density, and perhaps we didn't really dial in our nutrition with optimal vitamin D and calcium. Maybe we're in that point right now, and people who are listening are definitely at that spot. That's their scenario. So after the age of 40, this bone mineral is obviously starting to decrease. Can we do something about reversing this, or is it just now about slowing the loss of bone mineral?
What a good question. And I'm sure you've gotten that question many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%, there is something to be done. And I think you can look at it from two perspectives. The first one is, and I've had this happen quite frequently, and I think we're just catching it too early in a time period, is someone has a repeat scan or whatever kind of marker we're using to follow bone density, is we see no change. That's a definite possibility. And that usually, in my perspective, happens kind of in a maybe a 12-month to 16-month window. And when that conversation happens, we have to look at it from the perspective of, well, no change means we have stopped that rate of decline, which that's a pretty big
Yeah.
barrier to overcome,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So technically not gaining, but realistically we are gaining because we're maintaining
Right.
the rate. And then if we can really be consistent, and this is what much of the research shows, is we really need more time. Bone turnover, sometimes to even be measurable is maybe 8 months. And that's,
Okay.
from my perspective, pretty challenging to really start seeing positive improvements in that time period. Most of the research of really good impact, along with resistance training studies, that's kind of randomized controlled trials. Really, if you can get one that's at least a year, maybe to 18 months, then we start seeing, 3, 4, 5, 8% increases in some areas of bone, that's pretty phenomenal.
Right.
Outside of taking medication or hormone replacement therapy. So
Right.
I think that the key term there is just, which is so hard because it's so against human nature, is I've got to work and be diligent and all those things and be patient for that period of time. That's not easy. I feel for those people in that position.
Absolutely. It's not easy because, again, muscle, we could see some good adaptations if we're consistent, dripping water on the stone.
Mhm.
That's my little phrase that we say all the time here. Dripping water on the stone hollows it out, not through force, but through persistence. It's from
I like
Ovid.
it.
I know it's great, but we can see muscle shift if we are consistent within like the 3-month period, right? We're going to see you
Sure.
could see maybe some shifts start to happen, but bone, you're never going to see it
Yeah.
technically. But you're saying 8 months is a time frame where if you're doing all of the things, really dialing in all of those microprocesses, then when we scan again, you're not going to maybe lose, but you're not maybe even going to gain bone mineral density. But if you're not losing, you're winning. Is this what you're saying?
That's exactly it. I've had this conversation so many times, and it's like you're just looking at it reverse, because it could have been quite a drastic decline, but that didn't happen, right? So it is a
Right.
gain, a
Yeah, I
net
love it.
gain.
You're not losing, you're winning, folks. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's encouraging. I think a lot of people don't even do DEXA scans. I've had two now, and I'm thrilled to do it. I know they cost money here in Canada. You can get them anywhere between 150 or 125 and 250, depending on if you have a physician or a clinician read it to you and interpret it. But it's maybe worth something, like asking someone for a birthday gift or a Christmas gift, because it is so insightful and it's so telling. Could you just talk a little bit about the DEXA scan and why that is a good standard of measurement for bone mineral? If you
Absolutely,
think
yeah.
it
So
is, yeah.
it is considered maybe the past 15 or 20 years the gold standard for
Mhm.
bone mineral density and even body composition, kind of in that arena as well. But it's what we use when we do classify and diagnose osteoporosis. A T score, which is relating your bone mineral density to your ideal self at 30 years old.
Mhm.
And if that number is two standard deviations outside of what that number is, you're considered osteoporotic, right? Which is negative 2.5. So that is the standard, that is the measurement used. There's some newer technology. I'm not sure how available it is in Canada, and it's kind of starting to grow some traction in the US. It's called a REMS scan,
Okay.
REMS. I'm not gonna be
REMS.
able to, REMS. I'm not gonna be able to quote the long terms, the other words that it goes with. It's an
Okay.
acronym. But it really looks at more of the quality of bone. I think
Okay.
so DEXA kind of gives more of the quantity of what's there. There is some measure of fracture risk and things along those, depending on which device you're using. But the REM scan, it's looks more at the quality. So if you have both of those measures, you know, ideally done by someone who knows what they're doing.
Right.
You have a better picture of, I love seeing both when I have a person come to me when I get to work with them, is that they have both of those measurements. I get a better snapshot of how aggressive I can be with them as far as their fitness and their
Okay.
training, right?
Okay.
Um,
Okay. I hadn't heard of that before, and I just looked it up. It stands for radio frequency echographic multispectrometry. And
the
it's a
mouthful.
radiation-free ultrasound-based technology used to assess bone mineral density and quality, as you said there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and okay, I haven't had that done.
Yeah,
But
and it's
quality
very
would
kind
be
of practitioner dependent because that device, it takes a lot of practice. So if you have a new
okay.
person, you might be measuring something that might not be a great measurement.
Right. And quality is important, geometry is important, density is important. I'm
Sure,
learning all of
totally.
these things. I
Mhm.
had Dr. Darren Kandau on. He's a creatine monohydrate scientist expert. He's done lots of studies on creatine monohydrate. And one of the studies they did in postmenopausal women was a 2-year randomized control trial where they looked at how creatine could impact bone geometry. So can you talk to us about what that is? I don't want to pretend I know.
Yeah, but I mean, just looking more at the microstructure of the bone itself, and I think that's the biggest part that we're trying to have an influence on when when we're using all these techniques
Okay.
and strategies for how we're loading ourselves, right? We're trying to improve that matrix of the bone, make it stronger, layer on more bone to be able to withstand falls or trips or whatever we're going to do.
Hmm.
Um, so that's really what we're ultimately trying to measure and understand is that microstructure of the bone.
I would love to know what you think about the LiftMore trial.
Hmm.
So, for those of you who don't know what that is, you could look it up. It's LiftMore, LiftMore trial out of Australia, I believe. I know that I'm just going to read a little bit about what that is, just to give you a brief overview, and then I'll ask Dr. Trubee what he thinks about it. So, the LiftMore trial showed that heavy resistance training worked, but not that heavy was needed. So the LiftMore trial showed that postmenopausal women who performed high intensity resistance training, lifting heavy loads around that 80 to 85% of their max, combined with impact exercises like jumping, were able to increase bone mineral density at the spine and hip while also improving strength and function without increasing injury risk. Now, what's often misunderstood is that LiftMore trial proves heavy lifting works, but it doesn't prove that heavy lifting is the only way to build bone. What the broader body of evidence suggests is that bone responds to mechanical strain and novel loading, not just absolute load. Thoughts on that?
I love the lift more. I get so many questions on this.
Yeah.
And it's quite the study. I mean, you take a few weeks to really read it and reread it. But yeah, so they used it was all barbell work, squat,
Right.
back squat, deadlift, and shoulder press. So you have to be familiar and accustomed to using those at a pretty heavy load, 5 sets of five at 85% one rep max. And it was progressive. So they kept retesting 1 RM. So they kept increasing load. So it was a kind of a progressive study.
Yeah.
But when you dive into the details of that study, and the more I read on just resistance training in general, yes, there are many studies out there that only use resistance training and saw either protective measures of bone, meaning we saw, stabilization, or we saw increase. The component that really drives up and turns the thermostat up, kind of so to speak, is that
Mm-hmm.
impact component. The
Mm,
impact training is what really has both, because the bone responds in two ways. It wants the overall load, number one, just the force of the load, and the direction of that force is important, should be vertical, and the rate of force development, those two things. So how quickly is that force being seen at the bone level, and how much was it, right?
okay.
So impact really checks both of those boxes as far as compression and deflection of the bone and the rate at which the bone likes to see as far as the stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at just any study that's done really well and impact in the components of the LiftMore study that I love the most is that, only exercise, no HRT, no medication, not any of stuff like that. What can impact and heavier resistance training do? Data look
Mm,
pretty good. Now, how
good.
approachable is that for everybody getting into that scene? You've worked with enough people. Would you put them under a barbell back squat at 85% one rep max if they'd never lifted before?
Yeah.
Right. So not
And
super approachable for everybody,
no.
but the data look good. And what I
Yeah.
think I found is you can really start doing small, low intensity impact. And if someone responds well to that, you can kind of stair step them up. And then
Hmm.
using strategic resistance training to get additional mechanical loading, but then you're also kind of what I call bulletproofing their bodies for impact, right? It's hard to do high intensity impact if you're not physically strong enough to withstand at the joint, the soft tissue, the muscle, the effect of impact, right?
I
Um,
love what you said about that you can stair step them up. I think that is so crucial. And audience, those who are listening to this message and hear in social media that you need to lift heavy, that you need to do all of these things. And sometimes the message that you should start really light, a few times a week and then work your way up. That is missed in the nuance of listening to you need to do this if you don't want to die,
yeah.
And so people are freaking out and we're like, I got to do all these things. But the problem is that they're not stair stepping up. And I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to start at the ground level. And even in the LiftMore study, they spent over the first month just doing fundamentals. They didn't really
Right.
lift that much resistance, right? They kind of made sure they were at an appropriate place to increase their level of difficulty. And at the same time, I get that question too, lifting heavy, that's such a, yeah, I have
Yeah.
to lift heavy. Well, that is so variable, right? Heavy
Hmm.
for someone is going to be light for somebody else. So I think
Sure.
you have to approach it in the mindset of chasing a certain level of difficulty in your mind
Hmm.
as far as approaching some of these exercises. Because I just, remove the number. Let's try and get 8 or 10 repetitions where it's challenging. Your technique is good. You feel good about it, but it was hard, right?
Hmm.
It's an easier way to approach it and find, kind of a harmonious connection between your mind and your body and the psychology of all those things without
Hmm.
being terrified of, this is too much or is this the right thing or all those questions that creep in.
I like that idea of taking the numbers out because, if you're comparing yourself to someone else who's been in it for years and years and you go with the number that they've listed, that could be very daunting and you could injure yourself. But
Mhm.
using even that rate of perceived exertion scale, where, 0 out of 10 is you're sitting on the couch or lying on the couch, and 10 out of 10 is maximal effort, you can gauge yourself against yourself instead of
Mhm.
comparing yourself to someone else.
And that's the best approach. And compare, you're always going to be different every day you come
Yeah.
to challenge yourself. One day it's easy, one day it's difficult, and that's just the way we are as humans. So it's much more fluid and flexible and approachable, I think, using that.
Hmm. So you said impact. Of course, I know that there's women listening right now because I'll post something where I do a lunge and there's so many comments. My knees, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 70. It'd be nice if I were 60 or 50 like you, but I can't do it. We always get all of those comments,
Sure.
which I then say, well, my mother's 78 and she has a little jumping circuit that she does. So you could,
Yeah.
but there are people that can't do high impact, of course. Like
Sure.
we have different people with different issues, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis. We have people with different things. So I know I saw you on some of your Instagram posts the other day showing some really great entry level impact exercises with the heel drops and different things. I'd love for you to just kind of go through if you can't do this high impact, or maybe even if you can, could you walk us through a progression
Mm.
of starting to really a good aggressive impact workout?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people because it's not as much as you might think.
Mm,
Um, but also, it's very easy to do more, and more isn't always better with impact. So
okay.
always kind of keep
Okay.
that in your mind.
Yeah.
So I did a heel drop. I recently found a study I came across, and I think it was maybe from 2017 or 18, so relatively new.
Okay.
And they were just looking at, well, what is the actual force of the heel drop exercise? Is it meeting the threshold? And if you look at that threshold, most of the research is 3 to 4 times body weight we need to experience in the moment of impact to have enough stimulation for the bone for the osteocytes to recognize that's enough. And the heel drop is you basically go on your tippy toes
Mm-hmm.
and you come down relatively quickly on your heels, right? With a slight little knee and hip bend to kind of make sure we're protecting your joint still. Um, and when you do it, especially if the study was barefoot on a harder surface, you can tell there's some impact there. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like overly aggressive to where like, you're being overly cautious about was that terrible for me. But from that study, and they weren't actually doing, test and retest DEXA scans over X number of weeks or years or whatever. It was just, is it enough? And
Mm.
the average of that heel drop was, I think, if I went back and looked, it was over 4.5 times body weight that they were experiencing, and the rate of force development was exceeded that threshold. So that it checks a lot of boxes as far
Yeah.
as what it's doing. I call the heel drop kind of your gateway into impact because almost 95% of people I've worked with have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Some version of it, right? Maybe on a soft, let's start on a softer surface. Haven't jumped in 30 years. Let's ease our way into it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's the beauty of that is you can just if you can take your time. We're not rushing into it. It's let your body feel it, right? So realistically, the data I've seen from some previous studies with the heel drop is, 50 to 60 most days of the week for premenopausal women showed really good signs. So if you're premenopausal right now and you want an easy way to pass the time while you're brushing your teeth,
Oh, good.
do some heel drops. It's great. I do them now, right? I think there's value in them.
Yeah.
Um, so the data is good. On postmenopausal, the data it's kind of seen from what I've seen is more protective again, right? We're kind of slowing that rate of decline using that heel drop exercise. But 40, 50, 60, and you can kind of ease your way in and slowly ramp that up over time. Most days of the week is great. And then
Okay.
when you start getting into kind of moderate intensity impact, I use a lot what's called a counter movement jump. It's just kind of going back, your arms are back, you kind of go into a quarter squat position, you come up out of that and you jump and you land, right? I love
Like
it
a
because
squat jump, kind of like a squat
kind
jump.
of like a quarter squat jump, maybe,
Or
not all the way
okay.
down into a squat position. I think it's a little bit easier to approach for a newer person.
Sure.
Um, and you're not trying to jump as high as you can. I kind of say 50% effort, right? And you jump and you land in that athletic position where you're cushioning through hips and knees. Your knees are pointing forward. You're trying to land kind of, all foot kind of equally, kind of midfoot-ish as you land. And that kind of it's louder than landing quiet, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I think that's super approachable because you can control all your variables, right? How high I'm jumping, it's important. In terms of balance and visuals, you know exactly where you're taking off, you know exactly where you're landing. Those are two important things too. And then once you get better with that, you see how your body responds to that. You can always jump higher using that same movement to make it more intense. But
Hmm.
realistically, for like a session of moderate to higher impact, 40 to 50 jumps with a good solid landing would be considered a really good high intensity impact session.
Hmm.
I think most people do it and they're like, well, that wasn't that hard. I could have done a lot more. Well, we were sure, right? But do we need to? Probably
Right.
not. Right?
And
And then if
that's
you
where
want to
that,
get really, more
yeah.
higher intense, you've seen people kind of step off or jump off of a box or a
Hmm.
platform. That would definitely be much more higher impact.
Hmm. Hmm.
But at the same time, I don't think you need 100 jumps for a session.
I think it's great to always list that minimal effective dose, like what works,
Hmm.
what have we seen in the study works. And that is kind of could be versus what is my optimal workout for myself where I'm making sure that I'm staving off the loss of bone mineral density. I'm working my muscles. I'm getting a good sweat on. I'm improving my cardiorespiratory system. Like that could be optimal. But for minimal effective dose, you're saying that we can start with the heel drop
Hmm.
while we're brushing our teeth. Every day we brush our teeth, doing those heel drops. We can move that to some sort of counter movement where we're doing a slight quarter squat, jumping up and hitting that. How many times did you say that would be good?
I mean, I would probably start somewhere around maybe 30 plus or
Yeah,
minus for a front of a session. And this is only maybe 2 or 3 times a week you're doing that kind of
that's right.
moderate to higher intensity. Yeah,
And then you can move to the higher jumps,
exactly.
and hitting that 40 to 50 times. Yeah, I think that's a great protocol and really something for everyone to use. So that's excellent. Of course, I'll ask a little bit about the weighted vest because that had its day in the sun as well. And we've had a lot of different people come on and talk about it, but there still is a big camp that are wearing the weighted vest thinking that they're stimulating bone density. And that maybe is the only thing that they need to do to stimulate bone density. What are your thoughts on that? I know we talked about the LiftMore trial with the resistance training and the high intensity resistance training and impact. So how do those two things come up against each other?
For sure, yeah. So the weighted vest, I kind of understand, why it's exploded and how, all the things. But realistically, when you look at just a program in general, one thing that, especially from just a strength and even more so bone health perspective, is that it has to be able to have some kind of progressive overload.
Right.
right? Noticeable. It's very difficult to progressively overload a lot of these weight vests out there because they're 8 or 10 or 12 pounds or whatever. So is that load enough? Likely not. The data I've seen don't really support it as far as does it have an osteogenic effect just from adding a little bit more weight in general like that. Probably not, right? I also don't love the effect of like, well, I can throw on a 30 or a 40-pound weighted vest. Like, fantastic, but you haven't built up the structure of accompanying that weight gain that you just threw on with muscle mass
Right.
or joint protection or anything like that,
Yes.
right? So you haven't built up a robust enough system to withstand higher levels that may have an effect potentially of a higher weighted vest. So I don't love that, right? You just throw on 40 pounds of fat without any extra muscle. How I really use them for the ladies that have bought one and really want to keep using it is what they find is many exercises where grip strength is exceeded by lower body strength, like a deadlift or maybe a goblet squat or a step up exercise where they're holding, 25-pound dumbbell in each hand. Their legs are
Mhm.
strong enough to go to 30, but their hands can't, right? And I'm like, let's use that weighted vest. We can
Yeah.
progressively overload these compound movements where we get a lot of good mechanical loading. You can use that vest to a much more feasible way of, hey, let's increase the challenge here in a smart way. So that's kind of how I've approached it. Is I don't really say, hey, let's use it on a walk or a jog. Let's incorporate it on a neutral spine exercise that we can continue to load heavier if we need to.
I love that. Years ago, we competed in something called Fem Sport. It's kind of like Strong Women meets Tough Mudder. I don't know. It's just like it's a little circuit that you do, and it was work. It was hard. It's a fun little competition, but we were training for it, like in a gym and doing sled pushes and heavy lifts, barbells, the whole thing. We were really training hard. But that was one of the things that our coach had us do was when we were strong enough and had more muscle, he put us on like because one of the elements is box jumps so that you have to do 50 box jumps for time. And so having the weighted vest on just to do step ups
Mm.
because already we were strong enough, but now training that, just getting stronger in that vertical motion. I thought that was great. Like this was many years, 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden the weighted vests come back and we're like, we were using those, but not like how people are using them now. But
I mean,
yeah,
I think they're taking advantage of the trend, and really, I mean, even back then they were more of like, hey, let's increase the cardiovascular challenge of the
yeah,
exercise by adding
yeah,
more weight, right? You're kind of penalized by more weight.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Another thing that is kind of interesting that I get a lot of questions about is can we build bone density using the rebounder and the vibration plates? So what are your thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, rebounder I think is fantastic for other areas of our fitness, lymphatic health. I think it's great for having the capacity to jump, land, and then jump again. The quickness of that from a
Yeah,
neuromuscular to nervous system approach.
sure.
I think there's a lot of value in being able to recruit those, fast twitch, higher force producing, muscle fibers that we lose if we don't use them. From a bone health perspective, I haven't seen it. I'm sure there's some studies out there that have shown some. I haven't seen a lot. On vibration plate, though, I have seen some decent data, and it's really kind of product specific, ones that are able to withstand and maintain that frequency because it's using the frequency of loading as kind of the back door into challenging the bone, right? So if you look at a vibration plate, it's vertical oscillations. So that what they're attempting to do is that rate of force production on the bone. It's trying to stimulate that arena of bone health. I'm not sponsored by any of these equipment suppliers, but the one I'm familiar with probably the most is Power Plate. It has a high enough output it doesn't matter. I think you can be, multiple hundred pounds and it still maintains that rate of loading.
Mhm.
But even then it's like you've got to be on it almost every day for over a year. And their data says maybe 1 or 2% increase in bone mineral density, which that's still pretty good.
Yeah,
It also comes from their own data, which you always got to question that a little bit.
sure. Yeah.
But potentially, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, everything that I've read, I haven't recommended that. I think that some of it is that, like you just said, you have to be on it every day, like for a year, in order to see a difference. Whereas if we're doing strength training, we're maximizing so many other systems in the body, right? Like we're not only stimulating bone mineral, but we're now also building muscle, which is crucial for longevity. So if I guess if you have the time maybe to hop on the plate and you or you like it, I don't know. It's just like most of us don't have time to do all of the things. And I think if you're going to pick one or the other, your strength training session is probably going to give you more bang for the buck. Would you say
I
that's
would say, yeah, much more value in
yeah,
that route compared to using just the device for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I wanted to ask one other thing about the landing because I've gotten this question too. Sometimes when I'm leading a workout, we'll do a broad jump and it's a big jump forward. And sometimes I'll say, let's land softly, like sort of absorb the impact of that land because you're moving forward. And when you can absorb the impact of the landing and soften the knees and go down into that squat position, you're not going to continue moving forward. Now, someone said to me, oh, I thought we were supposed to land hard on a surface to stimulate bone impact. So could you talk to me about what would be the most appropriate in that scenario?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you're going to approach it because if we look at it from a pure impact perspective, we do need some relative hardness of, for lack of a better word, landing, right? The more
Yeah.
we cushion, because the way if you look at impact just mathematically, it's rate of force development over time, right? So how much force is it, and how long did it take for the force to stop,
Right.
essentially, force divided by time. So if you increase the time component you decrease the level of impact that we're seeing, if that makes
Okay.
sense, right? So
Yeah.
if you really cushion and slow that landing down, you decrease impact. If you land rapidly, impact goes through the roof. So I think realistically you need to use both because
Okay.
there's a lot of value in the cushioning and slowing of that landing eccentrically on the muscle.
Right.
Would
Quads
improve
would get that.
100%. So what you're really bulletproofing is the tendon, the muscle, and the joint of really understanding how to decelerate a lot of force in the moment, right? Tons of value there. I think you have to do that. If you really want to focus on impact, then you just kind of switch gears and have a little bit harder of a landing and likely not doing as many repetitions as you would be with those slower landings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So you really don't need as much of that really high impact as you think.
Hmm. I think that's what was included in the LiftMore trials, wasn't it? Like they were doing dead hangs and then just landing.
Yeah, so they had a bar kind of
Mhm.
held overhead, kind of arms at like 90-ish degrees. They pulled up and jumped and then landed. Pretty like, and they landed on a mat too, an exercise mat,
Okay.
but it was
Okay.
pretty high intensity.
Yeah. Are there some people that shouldn't do that? Like, talk to us about, because again, people are listening, they're going to hear us say, like, land hard with your,
Mhm.
don't absorb. And then I don't want anyone to get hurt, but some people probably shouldn't have done that.
Yeah,
So who's it contraindicated for?
a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Listen
I
up,
think,
ladies.
yeah, you can't just rush into it by any means. I would probably do what Stacy or what Tracy was just talking about in that let's focus on really understanding how to land first.
Mhm.
Cushioning, being quieter, let our joints and our muscles really kind of feel and absorb that level of force. Once you get good at that, then you have the mechanics in place and the joint protection and muscle strength in place to really start landing with a little bit more heavy foot, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
So if you are jumping, I even do a lot of like bounding pogo jumps, even though that's not really, affecting the bone much. It's more just like, hey, let's get the soft tissue involved in jumping and landing and things like that. But, um, I always recommend if you haven't jumped much or you're getting into it for the first time or taking a break, I always start heel drop every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We're not doing any kind of jumping yet. We're going to see how do you respond to the heel drop. If
Mhm.
everything feels good, there's no knee pain, no hip pain, then it's like we're doing a small kind of movement jump. Let's see how we do there. And I can watch you land and get some feedback on that. So it's
Mhm.
really like, hey, you think you want to do this in 3 months? No, this is gonna be like a 12-month
Mhm. Yeah.
timeline,
Yeah.
you know. So let's just get our brain around that first, and then we'll kind of slowly ease our way into it. That's the easiest way to set the stage for really having the most success.
Yeah. Get your brain around that, ladies, that it's going
Mm.
to take time to see a difference. But then, we've had lots of members who have gone in to get a DEXA scan last year and then come again this year and show their numbers have improved so dramatically. And it's very exciting, very encouraging when someone can see that what they're doing is actually making a difference. When it comes to testing, We know the DEXA scan's the gold standard we talked about. There's the FRAX score, which you can go on to. It's a fracture score. You can go onto the internet and just Google
Sure.
FRAX score, and then you just type in all your data about yourself. I'm a woman, 55 years old. And, if you've ever had any of the sort of bone diseases, they ask you that. And then it gives you a fracture score, how likely you are to develop a fracture. How important is this testing? How accurate is it? And what would you recommend women do and how frequently?
Great question. I'm not exactly, sure of the accuracy of that
Yeah.
or their black box equation they're using to figure that out. But I have seen some value in, because I know it is difficult and it's challenging to wait that long a period of time, because sometimes it's even 2 years before you get a repeat scan.
Hmm.
If you have a conversation with your physician and they're willing to do additional kind of blood panel work, you can look at two blood markers. The first one is
Okay.
P1NP,
Okay.
and CTX. Those are looking at bone turnover and bone remodeling. Um,
Okay.
so those are two you can kind of, if you're listening right now, you can do a little Google search on and read a little bit more about those and maybe have a conversation with your physician about, hey, can I add these onto my blood panel? And that would give me a little bit more details in the short term. Let's say, hey, if I can get this done every 6 months as I'm employing all these new training strategies, am I actually starting to see some, physiological changes in the right direction?
Okay. So PLNP and
Or
PTX.
P1,
Oh,
P1,
sorry,
and
P1. Yeah,
you got
sorry.
it. Yep. And then CTX. Those are two markers you can do some reading on.
Okay, that's good to know. And it's funny because like I've heard a lot of things over the last couple of years, especially doing the podcast. I'm constantly going to my doctor. I'm like, test this, test that, test this. But he's probably like, can you stop listening to things, please? But I think it's great because now we're better informed, right?
Mhm.
But who should ask for this? Is this something that we're all going to our physician saying, "Hey,
Hmm.
I would really like this," or if we're at a greater risk history, like who's the person that's asking for this?
I think you could use it as if you are in that arena of maybe my mom or my grandmother, has the propensity for, bone loss. I always recommend it for those that in that moment of, hey, we're gonna start with, whatever program we're working on, we're gonna employ some impact training. If we're kind of controlling variables, like if you're in a research study, here's our research study.
Mm,
Then I say, hey, if we can get some follow-up data from this blood work, then we can make quicker tweaks if we need to,
mhm.
right? Without having to wait an entire year, maybe longer, to say, hey, well, not that we wasted our time because we got stronger and
Yeah,
improved so many other things, but maybe we could have made smaller adjustments,
right,
a little more
right.
aggressive on the bone health side of things, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe if you're working with someone and that this is something that would really inform the training, that's probably going to be
That's the
important.
ideal time. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. If a 50-year-old woman started today, because a lot of people listening have not started their resistance training or impact protocol, what's the difference in her bone health from 50 to 60 if she trains properly, eats adequately versus if she doesn't?
Oh man, that's a great question. Obviously, perimenopause and menopause
Yeah.
can throw a little bit of tweak in there. In there.
Yeah.
But it could be a drastic decline. I mean, the data show that within the first 6 to 7 years after menopause, I mean, you can lose up to 20% bone mass, and that's a pretty big number. That scares me
Huge.
thinking about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're protective and you start early, really, really starting anytime is fantastic. I've got women that are starting close to 80 and we're seeing improvements. So that's, the
Oh,
body is an amazing thing. So, but yes, starting earlier would definitely be more beneficial just for the overall, joy of your life all
hmm.
around.
Yeah.
But from a bone health perspective, it just gives you a little bit more time to build your kind of foundation to where when it's time to get, more aggressive if you need to, you have it.
Build the reserves, folks, because the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining.
Yes,
That's
perfect.
JFK, not me. I'm just a little quotey person here. Nick, thank you so much for being the guest today. I appreciate your time and your knowledge. It was excellent. Where can people follow you and or work with you?
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, so the easiest place is on Instagram of all places, dr.nicktrubee. And then more info on me you can find at my website at trubeehealth.com.
That's super awesome. I will list all of that in the show notes below. So jump down there, take a look, and follow Nick. He's got so many great things. I scroll Instagram all the time. I'm just look at his little tutorials because he's in his gym, as you can see in the background if you're watching on video, and he shows you how to do things. And that can be so helpful because it's that reminder, right? That we should be dripping water on the stone, and little things add up over time to make big changes. So thanks again for being my guest.
Thank you, Tracy.
Now, to all of you, go move daily in your fitness, your wellness, your nutrition, and your bone health. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.